There are songs that become hits. There are songs that become classics. And then there are songs that feel eternal, etched into the collective memory of humanity, like fire discovered for the first time. Billie Jean is one of those songs. From the very first bass line, a pulse begins to beat inside you, as if your own heartbeat has been borrowed and rewired. The voice, urgent yet restrained, carries a story of danger, betrayal, and obsession. The rhythm doesn't just invite you to move, it demands it. But here is the haunting question. Could such a phenomenon, such a perfect storm of groove, melody, and myth, really be created in just a single night? That is the story we've been told, whispered in documentaries, repeated in interviews, mythologized by fans. The tale of Michael Jackson driving late at night, struck by a divine spark, and delivering a masterpiece before the sun rose. A story too perfect to believe, yet too powerful to dismiss. And here's the shocking part. The truth is even stranger, because the night Billie Jean was born was not just another night in the life of a pop star. It was the culmination of years of pressure, paranoia, betrayal, and hunger. It was the sound of a man refusing to be owned, refusing to be dismissed, and refusing to compromise. This is not the story of a catchy hit. It is the story of survival, the song that almost never was, the song Quincy Jones nearly killed, the song born not from celebration but from pain, rage, and obsession. You've heard the beat, you've heard the voice, but you have not heard the truth. Because Billie Jean was not just written, it was conjured, summoned, and once it arrived, the world was never the same again. And the deeper you look, the more you realize the song was alive before anyone else even heard it. Billie Jean is not just a track on Thriller. It is the very heartbeat of Michael Jackson's legend. And tonight you will learn how one man, haunted by rumors, hounded by critics, and driven by an obsession only he understood, created the impossible in a single night. But to understand the miracle, you must first understand the darkness, because before there was Billie Jean, there was a world determined to break Michael Jackson down, and it was that world and its betrayals that gave birth to the beat. Today, the year was the early 1980s. Michael Jackson was no longer the child star who had charmed the world with the Jackson 5. He was no longer the teenager proving he could survive on his own with Off the Wall. He was something in between, a young man standing at a crossroads, with the world watching closely, whispering doubts into the air. Yes, Off the Wall had been a triumph. Yes, it had given him hits, respect, and a taste of solo glory. But in the eyes of the industry, he was still a product of Motown, still a performer who sang other people's songs, still a child who happened to grow taller. The critics said he was lucky. The labels said he was replaceable. Even Quincy Jones, his producer and mentor, wondered if lightning could strike twice. Michael knew the truth. He was not meant to be a fleeting star. He was meant to be a universe. But to prove that, he would need something undeniable. Something so electrifying it could silence every critic, every whisper, every doubt. And the pressure was crushing. Because in those days, black artists were rarely allowed to dominate the mainstream for long. Michael could feel the industry's invisible clock ticking, waiting to move on to the next trend. He felt trapped between worlds, too famous to go back, yet not free enough to stand alone. The world wanted him to fail. But inside him, another world was forming. A world of rhythm and sound no one else could hear. Michael wasn't just writing songs. He was imagining an escape route, a way to break chains no one admitted existed. And when Billie Jean began to take shape inside his mind, it wasn't just a story about a girl and a lie. It was a story about him, his name, his reputation, his truth. The stakes were higher than fame. This was identity, survival, the right to be more than what the world thought he was. And somewhere between the critics who doubted him and the demons that haunted him, the groove began to whisper. A rhythm born from paranoia, pulsing like footsteps in the dark. Michael Jackson was about to turn his torment into triumph, but the way the song first arrived was stranger than anyone could have guessed. It began not in a studio, not with an instrument, not even with a notebook. It began in the silence of a late-night car ride. Michael Jackson had a habit that baffled his friends and terrified his security team. Late at night, he would get into a car, sometimes alone, sometimes with a driver, and simply drive. No destination, no plan, just endless roads and the hum of the night. Why? Because the car was his secret laboratory. The motion of the wheels, the rhythm of the road, the hum of the engine. It was here that Michael's inner symphony would come alive. He didn't need instruments. He didn't need a piano. He didn't even need a tape recorder. His mind was the studio. His voice was the instrument, and on one of those nights, as the car slipped into darkness, the beat arrived. It wasn't just a bass line. It was a pulse, insistent and hypnotic. Michael began humming, tapping, layering sounds only he could hear. The kick, the snare, the melody. The whisper of lyrics waiting to be born. To anyone else, he might have looked like a man lost in thought. But inside his mind, Billie Jean was already alive, fully formed, fully orchestrated, waiting only to be revealed. And here's the staggering truth. Michael could hold entire songs in his head, perfectly arranged, without forgetting a single detail. He could hear the strings, the bass, the reverb, the harmonies, every element in its place. He didn't need sheet music. He didn't even need instruments. He was the orchestra. That night, in that car, he wasn't creating a song. He was receiving it, channeling it, summoning it from the silence of the road. But the road had its dangers. As he told later, he became so lost in the rhythm that he didn't notice a car accident just ahead of him. Smoke rising, metal twisted. A near tragedy, and yet even in that chaos, the song would not leave him. It clung to him like destiny, refusing to let go. Michael would later say he believed the universe protected him that night because it needed him to deliver the song. As if Billie Jean wasn't just his creation, but a force larger than him, demanding to be born. And by the time the car pulled into safety, the song was already finished, inside his mind, every note intact, waiting for the studio to catch up. To the world, Billie Jean was still a mystery. To Michael, it was already reality, and yet the story had only just begun, because what awaited in the studio was not celebration, but conflict. For when Michael finally revealed the beat inside him, the people closest to him didn't believe in it at all. Michael Jackson had always been chased by whispers. Fame had carried him to a place of global adoration, but it also wrapped him in suspicion. Every move, every glance, every relationship was twisted by tabloids into tales of scandal, and at the center of that chaos stood a name, Billie Jean. Who was she? A real woman? A ghost? A rumor? A symbol? To this day, her identity remains one of music's greatest enigmas. Michael's own explanation was chillingly simple. Billie Jean was not one woman. She was many. She was every false claim, every accusation, every stranger who insisted they had shared a secret life with him. She was the embodiment of fame's darkest curse, to be desired by millions, yet to be trusted by none. For years, Michael had been hounded by women claiming he had fathered their children. Letters arrived by the dozens. Fans fainted, screamed, insisted they belonged to him. Some came to his door, others to his hotel rooms, and worse, some appeared in court. Michael carried this with him. It ate at him. The paranoia, the betrayal, the sense that his very identity was under siege. Even in his moments of triumph, there were shadows whispering, "You are not safe. You are not free. Out of this torment, a story took form. The story of a woman who insists her child belongs to him. A lie so dangerous it could shatter reputations, lives, futures. The line between fiction and reality blurred, but the emotional truth was clear. This was Michael's revenge song. His confession, his warning. The lyrics came like lightning. Billie Jean is not my lover. She's just a girl who claims that I am the one. But the kid is not my son. It wasn't just words. It was a defense carved into melody, a shield he could raise every time the tabloids drew their knives. But the genius of Michael was never just in what he said. It was in how he said it. Billie Jean wasn't a ballad of sorrow or anger. It was a groove, a seduction, a rhythm so hypnotic you could dance even as you were listening to a story of betrayal and accusation. This was the paradox of Michael's art. He took his torment and made it beautiful. He made pain irresistible. He made paranoia danceable. But there was something else, something deeper, almost obsessive. Michael didn't just want the song to sound good. He wanted it to feel dangerous. Every beat, every note, every breath had to carry the weight of his fear and his defiance. And that meant when he finally entered the studio, the battle was only beginning. Because in his mind, Billie Jean already existed. But to the men around him, the producers, the engineers, even Quincy Jones, it was still just another experiment, and not everyone believed this experiment was worth saving. For the moment Michael revealed his vision, a war began, not against rumors, but against the very people meant to help him. The studio was supposed to be a sanctuary. For Michael, it was the one place where the outside world could not intrude. No screaming fans, no gossip columns, no false accusations. Only music. But when he walked in with Billie Jean burning in his head, he quickly realized, even here the battle would rage. The night began like many others. Quincy Jones, the legendary producer, was there, mentor, guide, but also skeptic. Engineers checked levels, assistants prepared reels. And Michael, almost silent, almost ghost-like, stood in the corner, humming to himself, tapping his shoes on the floor. And then the sound began to spill out. Michael's mouth became the orchestra. He beatboxed the rhythm. He hummed the bass line. He sang the melody, falsetto and grit, layering sound upon sound until the room itself began to vibrate. To the untrained ear, it may have sounded childish. But to Quincy, it was both genius and madness. He heard a groove, yes, but it was too repetitive. Too simple. Too dangerous. Throw it away, Quincy muttered once, dismissing the bass line. It's not strong enough. It doesn't go anywhere. But Michael froze. His usually soft voice sharpened. No, this stays. This is the heartbeat. Without it, the song dies. And there, in the silence that followed, a rift began to open. For Quincy Jones, trained in jazz, orchestrations, and complexity, a song had to evolve, to rise, to shift. But for Michael, perfection was not complexity. It was hypnosis. It was the ability to lock a listener in a trance that never let go. The Clash was more than musical. It was generational, philosophical, even spiritual. Quincy saw limits. Michael saw eternity. And so the battle began. Take after take, hour after hour. Michael demanding the bass line sit exactly where he heard it in his mind. Quincy pushing back, questioning, doubting, trying to guide the song into safer territory. But Michael would not bend. He danced as he sang, moving across the studio floor, every step connected to the groove. Sweat poured, his voice cracked, but he would not stop. He wanted not just to sing the song, but to live it, to prove with his body that the rhythm was undeniable. The tension in the room grew thick. Engineers exchanged glances, whispering whether this session would collapse. Quincy shook his head, muttering about wasted time. But Michael was locked in. The studio became his battlefield, the microphone his sword. And as the hours stretched into dawn, the truth became unavoidable. Michael was not experimenting. He was channeling. He wasn't searching for the song. He was defending it, protecting it from being lost or diluted. By the time the session ended, the groove had been laid down. Not finished, not polished, but alive. And yet, the war was far from over. Because while Michael had won the first round, Quincy Jones was not convinced. And what came next would test Michael's obsession to the breaking point, an obsession that would demand not just one recording, but 91 different mixes of the same song. The human body has its own language, a heartbeat, a pulse, a rhythm that carries us through every waking moment. And when Michael Jackson heard the bass line for Billie Jean, he knew instantly. This was not just a sound. This was life itself. But to everyone else in the room, it was something far less. Too simple. Too repetitive. Too risky. The notes were sparse, just a handful repeating again and again, like footsteps echoing in a dark alley. It didn't soar. It didn't swell. It didn't dazzle with complexity. To Quincy Jones, to seasoned musicians around him, it seemed unfinished, like a skeleton without flesh. Quincy's verdict was swift. This bass line isn't going anywhere. We can't build a hit on this. Michael's eyes darkened. To him, that line was not weakness, it was hypnosis. He could already hear how those few notes would lock into the human brain like a secret code, impossible to forget. He knew that sometimes the smallest fragments held the greatest power. "Don't touch it," Michael whispered. "It stays," but the debate refused to die. Quincy, with his decades of experience, argued for structure, for change, for growth. A song had to move. It had to evolve. A bass line that never changed was, in the language of jazz and soul, a mistake. Yet Michael refused to see it as a mistake. He saw it as inevitability because he understood something few others did. Repetition is not weakness. Repetition is obsession. Repetition is the sound that turns into memory, into trance, into immortality. And Michael believed so fiercely in that truth that he was willing to risk it all. He didn't care if Quincy doubted him. He didn't care if the engineers shook their heads. He didn't care if the executives thought it wouldn't sell. He knew. But that knowledge came with a price. Every session became a tug of war. Quincy's team suggesting variations, embellishments, breakdowns, Michael stripping them away, insisting on purity. The more they pushed, the more he resisted. The bass line had to remain untouched. For Michael, compromise was not an option. Billie Jean was not just a song. It was a declaration. It was his refusal to let anyone else write his truth. If they destroyed the groove, they destroyed the heartbeat. Still, the controversy grew louder. Rumors spread within the studio. Michael's lost it. He's obsessed with nothing. This song won't work. And yet Michael stayed silent, patient, letting the music defend itself. He knew time would prove him right. But to get there, he would have to fight harder than ever before, because this was no longer just about a bass line. It was about control. Who owned the music? Who made the decisions? The veteran producer with a lifetime of hits, or the young visionary whose instincts seemed almost supernatural? The clash was inevitable, and when it came, it would shake the walls of the studio. The bass line had lit the spark. Now, the full battle for Billie Jean was about to erupt. The studio became a war zone, not of fists or shouts, but of wills. Two visions colliding. On one side, Quincy Jones, the architect, the legend, the man who had mentored Michael and shaped Off the Wall into a masterpiece. His instincts told him to trust his training. Songs needed structure, variation, surprises. The bass line alone could not carry the weight. On the other side, Michael Jackson, the artist no longer content to be guided, no longer willing to be underestimated. His instincts came not from theory, but from a place deeper, more primal. He didn't just hear music, he felt it in his veins, in his skin, in his bones. The clash wasn't just creative, it was generational. Quincy represented the old guard, the way things had always been done. Michael was the future, demanding freedom, demanding risk. Hours turned into days. Days turned into weeks. Engineers watched as mix after mix was recorded, adjusted, erased, recorded again. 91 versions in total, each one a different battlefield scar. Quincy pushing for polish, Michael stripping it down. Quincy adding layers, Michael tearing them off. The atmosphere grew suffocating. Assistants walked on eggshells. Some whispered that the song was cursed, that it would never be finished. But Michael's obsession only grew stronger. He barely slept. He barely ate. He moved through the studio like a man possessed, dancing in the control room, hearing every detail no one else could hear. When Quincy suggested cutting the song from the album altogether, Michael's silence was terrifying. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply stared, his eyes burning with something beyond anger, something closer to destiny. Because in his mind, this song was already a masterpiece. The world just hadn't caught up yet, and slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. Each time the bass line throbbed through the speakers, something undeniable happened. Engineers started tapping their feet. Assistants started swaying in the corner. Even the skeptics found themselves caught in its spell. What Quincy had dismissed as too simple revealed itself as hypnotic power. The groove refused to let go. It demanded attention. It demanded surrender. Michael's vision was winning, not through argument, but through inevitability. And when the final mix at last began to take shape, the studio transformed. The tension did not vanish, but something else rose in its place. Awe. For they were no longer working on just another song. They were building a monument. Michael had fought for his truth, and in doing so, he had shifted the balance of power. No longer just a singer, no longer just a performer, he was now the architect of his own legend. But the battle left scars. The endless sessions, the clashes, the sleepless nights, they took a toll. And Michael, ever the perfectionist, was not done yet, because even after victory, his obsession would not rest. 91 mixes later, he was still chasing a sound only he could hear. And that obsession, pushed to its breaking point, would define not only the song, but the man himself, for what came next was not relief, but an even deeper descent into the dangerous pursuit of perfection. The war for Billie Jean was not over when the bass line survived. In truth, that was only the beginning, because Michael Jackson was not a man who simply created songs. He pursued them, chased them, dissected them, and remade them until they were no longer just sounds but living entities. And with Billie Jean, his obsession reached terrifying heights. The number itself is legendary. 91 mixes. 91 different attempts to sculpt the same track into its ultimate form. For any other artist, a handful of takes would suffice. For Michael, there was always something more, an echo slightly off, a hi-hat too sharp, a breath not timed to perfection. "Do it again," he would whisper, over and over, until the room grew heavy with exhaustion. Engineers slumped in chairs, their ears ringing, their patience drained. But Michael's eyes stayed fixed on the speakers, scanning every note as though each one carried the weight of destiny. What drove this obsession? It was not vanity. It was not arrogance. It was conviction, the belief that a song had to feel inevitable. Not just good, not just catchy, but inevitable. As though the moment you heard it, you believed it had always existed. Michael demanded that inevitability. He believed that every listener, no matter who they were, should feel trapped in the song's gravity, unable to escape. So he pushed, and pushed, and pushed. At times, Quincy Jones pleaded with him to let it go. "It's finished, Michael," he would say. But Michael would only shake his head. Finished was not enough. Finished was a compromise. Perfect was the only word that mattered. The studio became a strange kind of purgatory. Night bled into day. Meals were forgotten. Time ceased to exist. The team was not recording a song. They were fighting against the very limits of human patience and endurance. And yet, there was something magnetic about the process. Even those who doubted, who cursed under their breath, found themselves pulled deeper into Michael's obsession. Because every time a new mix played, the groove tightened, the vocals sharpened, the pulse grew stronger. Slowly, painfully, the song was becoming indestructible. Michael once said he wanted every sound to make you feel. Not think, not analyze, feel. A kick drum should hit your chest like a heartbeat. A bass line should crawl into your skin. A breath should whisper against your neck. Billie Jean was not just music, it was sensation. And when at last, after 91 attempts, the mix settled into its final form, the room fell silent. Not because the team was relieved, but because they were stunned. They knew they had witnessed something beyond ordinary creation. Michael had taken obsession, paranoia, and perfectionism and transformed them into immortality. But he was not finished. Because a song, no matter how perfect, was still only sound. To live forever, it needed flesh. It needed movement. It needed to be seen. And soon the world would see it, on a night that would change music history forever. For when Michael stepped onto the stage at Motown 25, he was not just performing Billie Jean. He was about to unveil a miracle the world had never witnessed before. It was May 16th, 1983. A television special was set to honor Motown's 25th anniversary. The lineup was stacked with legends past and present, but no one knew. No one suspected that history was about to be rewritten that night. Michael Jackson was scheduled to perform. The plan was simple: reunite with his brothers for a Jackson 5 medley, then close with a solo moment. Nothing more, nothing less. But Michael had other plans. He had been preparing something in silence, something even his closest collaborators didn't fully grasp. A performance that would not just showcase a song, but would transform it into a cultural earthquake. The Jackson 5 medley went smoothly. The audience clapped, smiled, indulged in nostalgia. And then the brothers left the stage. Michael stood alone. The lights dimmed. A familiar bass line crawled from the speakers. Billie Jean. The crowd roared, but they didn't know. They didn't know that in the next few minutes, they would witness the birth of an icon. Michael began to sing, his voice sharp, his movements precise, every gesture tied to the groove he had fought for. The fedora, the single glove, the spark of mystery, all part of a persona meticulously constructed, yet effortlessly alive. And then, in the middle of that stage, it happened. The moonwalk, a single glide backward that defied physics, defied expectation, defied everything the audience thought they knew about dance. In that moment, time froze. Gasps erupted, screams followed, and a legend was born. But here is the truth. The moonwalk was not an accident, not a trick. It was the physical embodiment of Billie Jean. The bass line was a pulse. The rhythm was a trance. And the moonwalk was its manifestation, Michael sliding out of reach, untouchable, unstoppable, untethered from reality itself. In that instant, the song and the man fused into something inseparable. Billie Jean was no longer just sound, it was sight, movement, myth. The performance was not just entertainment, it was revelation, and the world responded accordingly. Within days, everyone was talking. Within weeks, Michael Jackson was no longer just a star. He was a phenomenon. Sales of Thriller exploded. His image dominated television, magazines, headlines. The moonwalk became a rite of passage, imitated by millions, attempted by billions, perfected by none. But behind the glitter, behind the screams and applause, Michael knew the truth. He had shown the world his masterpiece, but the cost of reaching that moment had been immense. The nights of obsession, the battles in the studio, the weight of paranoia, every scar was hidden beneath the glove. Still, he understood something profound. Billie Jean had saved him. It had turned whispers of doubt into roars of belief. It had silenced the critics, shattered the boundaries, and given him a throne no one could take away. And yet, even at the height of triumph, shadows lingered. Because for all its glory, Billie Jean was born of torment, mistrust, and lies. Its perfection was carved from paranoia. Its triumph was built on pain. Michael had won the battle. But deep down he knew the war was far from over. Every masterpiece hides its roots, and Billie Jean was no exception. Michael often said the song came to him fully formed, delivered by something beyond human. But in truth, fragments of inspiration had been collecting inside him for years. There was James Brown, the godfather of soul, whose grooves taught Michael that rhythm could command bodies like a puppet master. There was Diana Ross, whose elegance and mystique whispered of personas carefully crafted yet forever untouchable. And there was the raw pulse of disco and funk, a heartbeat that had already electrified the world before Michael transformed it into something sharper, darker, more eternal. But perhaps the deepest inspiration was not musical at all. It was emotional. Michael's childhood had been scarred by suspicion, mistrust, and false rumors. As a young man, he learned how lies spread faster than truth, how envy could stain even the purest reputation. Billie Jean was not merely a song about a woman. It was a shield, a coded confession, a warning wrapped in rhythm. Even the name Billie Jean was deliberate. It was anonymous, faceless, universal. A stand-in for anyone who sought to trap him, betray him, or weaponize his fame. Michael never named the real women behind the rumors because that was never the point. The point was to transform his torment into art so undeniable that it devoured the very lies that spawned it. And that was the brilliance. Michael turned pain into power. What was meant to destroy him instead crowned him king. But pain has a way of returning no matter how high the throne. And for Michael, the shadow of Billie Jean would follow him long after the applause faded. When the lights dimmed after Motown 25, Michael Jackson was no longer just an artist, he was a myth. And with myth came the curse of immortality. The song that had begun as paranoia became his prison. For every triumph Billie Jean echoed in the background, reminding him that perfection once achieved must be repeated, outdone, surpassed. Fans demanded it. Critics demanded it. Michael demanded it of himself. Every tour, every performance, Billie Jean was summoned like a ritual. The glove, the fedora, the bass line that could still electrify stadiums. And though the world never tired, Michael did. Because for him, each repetition was not joy, it was burden. In interviews, he often seemed haunted, speaking of sleepless nights, of melodies that visited him like spirits, of dances that refused to let him rest. The very song that secured his throne became the chain that bound him to it, and yet he never abandoned it. Because deep inside, he knew what few understood. Billie Jean was not just music, it was his immortality. Long after he was gone, it would keep breathing, keep pulsing, keep reminding the world of the boy who once dreamed in Gary, Indiana, and became eternal. But before that immortality could be sealed, one final truth about the song had to be revealed. Truth darker and stranger than anyone could imagine. For decades, fans debated, who was Billie Jean? Was she real? Was she fiction? Or was she something in between? Michael himself fueled the mystery, sometimes insisting she was not real, other times hinting at experiences too dangerous to name. But behind the contradictions lay a truth that few dared confront. Billie Jean was not a woman. She was not one person. She was fame itself. Think of the lyrics again. Billie Jean is not my lover. She's just a girl who claims that I am the one. What is fame, if not a lover that never was, claiming ownership of you, making demands you never agreed to? What is fame, if not a force that projects stories onto your life, true or false, without your consent? Michael's paranoia was not just about women chasing him. It was about the world chasing him. The song was prophecy. It was Michael warning himself and us that fame seduces, consumes, and lies. That the brighter the light, the darker the shadow it casts. And what makes this revelation so haunting is that Michael could not escape it. His entire life unfolded exactly as Billie Jean foretold. Accusations, lies, obsessions, all wrapped around him like chains until the very prophecy he sang became his destiny. When he whispered, "The kid is not my son," he was not just denying a rumor. He was pleading with the world, believe me. See me, don't let the lies define me. But the world rarely listens. And so, Michael danced in his cage, moonwalking backward from the truth, gliding further and further from peace. This is the secret that makes Billie Jean more than a hit. It makes it a tragedy. Because in chasing perfection, Michael also sealed his curse. The song that gave him immortality also stripped him of freedom. And yet, within that contradiction lies brilliance. For though the man is gone, the song lives on. And every time we hear it, we do not just hear a beat. We hear his struggle, his paranoia, his prophecy. We hear the cost of being king. And perhaps that is why Billie Jean will never die. Because it was never just about Michael Jackson. It was about all of us, caught between desire and danger, fame and freedom, truth and lies. When the first notes of Billie Jean echo across a room, something happens. Time pauses, feet tap, hearts race. A presence fills the air. That is not coincidence. That is not chance. That is legacy. Michael Jackson did not create a song in one night. He created a monument carved from obsession, fear, triumph, and pain. He showed us that music could be more than entertainment. It could be prophecy. It could be immortality. And so every time we hear Billie Jean, we are not just listening. We are remembering. We are reliving the night the world changed, the moment a man became myth, the sound that refused to die. Michael Jackson is gone, but Billie Jean is still here, whispering, pulsing, moonwalking across generations. And if you listen closely, you can still hear him in the groove, reminding us of the truth that legends are not born, they are created. Created in pain, created in fire, created in one unforgettable night.